It was the summer of 1885 in a quiet Ohio town, the kind of place where nothing strange ever seemed to happen. Until the day a photographer named Samuel Rourke set up his traveling studio on Main Street. He specialized in family portraits and single sittings, a luxury for many who wanted to preserve their faces on glass plates before time erased them. On a humid afternoon, a young woman named Clara Whitmore walked in, her posture rigid, her eyes cast downward as though even standing in front of the lens was a burden. Samuel noted that she barely spoke, answering his questions with nods, and when asked if she'd like to smile for the photograph, she remained silent. The studio itself was dim, lit only by filtered sunlight through the tall windows and the faint chemical odor of developer trays. Samuel positioned Clara carefully, adjusting the lace at her collar, fixing the fall of her gloves, and tilting her chin just so. At no point did he see her lips move, let alone curl upward. Her expression was pale, detached, an almost empty look, as though she were waiting for something unseen. He braced his camera, pulled the cloth over his head, and counted her down. 1, 2, hold. The plate burned her image into permanence. But when it developed, something was wrong. In the finished portrait, Clara was smiling. It wasn't a soft, natural grin. No, it was stiff, unsettling, and stretched just enough to look unnatural. Her lips curved as though frozen in place, while her eyes remained hollow, detached, and lifeless. Samuel stared at the plate in silence, checking his notes, his memory, anything that might explain it. He could swear she had never smiled. Not once. Not even when he tried to ease the tension with small talk. The image had captured something he hadn't seen in the studio, something that hadn't happened in real time. When townsfolk caught sight of the photograph, whispers started almost immediately. Some claimed it wasn't Clara's smile at all, that her lips looked sharper, almost forced, like another hand had reached in and shaped them. Others swore her expression resembled someone else entirely, a stranger wearing her face. Clara herself offered no explanation. When shown the portrait, she didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't deny it. She only studied the image for a moment before turning away, her silence speaking louder than any denial could. Over the following days, the photograph became a subject of hushed gossip in every parlor and shop. Children said they didn't like looking at it for long, that her grin seemed to widen the more you stared. Adults muttered about spirit photographs, a popular fascination of the time, though no one dared say it too loud. And Samuel, the man who had taken it, kept the plate locked in his studio cabinet, uneasy with the idea that a photograph had captured more than what stood in front of the lens. Something had appeared on that glass plate, something that hadn't been there in the room. In life, Clara Whitmore had never been known for warmth. She was a quiet figure in town, walking the streets with her bonnet low and her gloves tight, hardly acknowledging neighbors who greeted her. Shopkeepers said she rarely spoke above a whisper, if she spoke at all, and more often than not, she moved like someone drifting in and out of a fog. People who knew her best claimed she never laughed, never smiled, not even as a child. So when her portrait showed that strange, rigid grin, the townsfolk were shaken. It wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural. Her neighbors began to argue about it in hushed tones. Mrs. Dawes, who lived next door, insisted she'd watched Clara grow up and never once saw her smile, even at church socials or family gatherings. The blacksmith swore he remembered Clara, standing silent at her mother's funeral, face as blank as stone. "That girl's mouth doesn't know how to bend," he muttered over his ale. The portrait, then, was a contradiction, a piece of evidence that didn't line up with a lifetime of observation. And in small towns, contradictions bred fear. Even Samuel, the photographer, couldn't explain it away. He remembered the way Clara sat in his chair, still as a doll, her lips pressed tight and her breathing shallow. He remembered the moment his lens captured her. Expressionless, unsmiling. Yet when the plate was developed, the smile was there, unmistakable. He began to question whether the chemicals had warped, or if his own eyes had played tricks on him in the dim light. But the more he studied it, the less it seemed like an accident. The smile wasn't blurred or faint. It was sharp, deliberate, placed with precision, as though someone else had decided she should wear it, and there was something wrong about it, something no one could quite put into words. Her lips didn't carry the softness of joy, nor the mischief of a secret grin. Instead, it was stretched, pulled, like the mouth belonged to another face entirely. When Clara looked at the photo herself, she did not confirm or deny. She simply set it down and walked away, leaving the room silent behind her. That silence unsettled people more than any denial could have. Soon, rumors began to circulate. Some said the smile looked borrowed, as though another presence had stepped into the photograph at the last second, wearing her like a mask. Others whispered of seances and spirit impressions, claiming the dead sometimes forced their way into photographs. But the most disturbing thought of all came from a farmer's wife, who studied the photo late one evening. That ain't Clara's smile at all. That's someone else, looking out through her. Years after the portrait was taken, long after Clara Whitmore herself had faded from memory, the belongings of photographer Samuel Rourke were discovered in a dusty trunk at an estate sale. Among the boxes of cracked lenses, rusted tripods, and brittle glass plates lay a leather-bound journal, its cover warped from years of damp storage. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. Lists of appointments, chemical recipes for developer solutions, and sketches of camera designs. But scattered between those mundane details were entries that unsettled even the most skeptical readers. In careful script, Samuel had written about Clara's sitting, and the words were not those of a calm, rational man. He described her as unnaturally still, noting that her body seemed too heavy for the chair, as though she were anchored in place by some invisible hand. He claimed she never blinked during the long exposure, not once, though the process took far longer than any person could reasonably sit without movement. Her eyes were open, he wrote, but vacant, like glass marbles. I could not shake the thought she was listening to something I could not hear. Samuel's handwriting pressed harder into the page when he described the moment the plate developed. Her mouth curved on its own. I never instructed it. I never saw it. But there it was. The most disturbing passage was scrawled hastily in the margin, as if he hadn't meant anyone to see it. The ink was darker, the letters uneven. That smile wasn't hers. I don't know whose it was. The phrasing struck collectors as odd. Not what it was, but whose. As if Samuel believed a separate identity had inserted itself into Clara's image, an intruder that had taken ownership of her expression. He made no attempt to rationalize it with tricks of the lens or chemical mishaps. To him, it was deliberate, purposeful. After that entry, the journal grew stranger. Samuel wrote of feeling watched in his studio after hours, the sensation of a presence lingering just behind him. On several occasions, he claimed to hear a faint click, as if his camera shutter had gone off on its own. Once, while locking up, he swore he saw a figure in the reflection of a drying plate, a pale shape with lips stretched into that same rigid grin. It follows, he wrote, from the glass to the darkroom, from the darkroom to my dreams. The last entry mentioning Clara was dated 3 months after the photograph was taken. His tone was shaken, desperate. I covered the plate. I locked it away. But sometimes, when I pass the cabinet, I hear it. The sound is faint but certain, like laughter pressed between glass. And with that line, the page ended abruptly. No explanation, no follow-up. Only silence in the yellowed pages that followed. It happened just a week after Clara's portrait was taken. The Whitmore home, a large Victorian house that overlooked the edge of town, suddenly went quiet. At first, neighbors thought nothing of it. Families often traveled without notice. But soon the silence grew strange. Curtains remained drawn, day and night. Smoke no longer curled from the chimney, and the lantern that usually flickered in the upstairs window went dark. Children playing nearby whispered that the house looked like it was holding its breath. On the 8th day, curiosity pushed a group of townsfolk to check the house. They found the front door unlocked, swinging slightly with the breeze. Inside, everything was in its place. The parlor was neat, the rugs freshly beaten, the clock on the mantel still ticking. In the dining room, a table was set for 6, plates arranged, silver polished, and food half-eaten as though the family had risen in the middle of dinner. Candles had burned all the way down, their wax hardened into twisted stalactites on the tablecloth. But there was no sign of life, not a voice, not a footprint, not even the sound of movement upstairs. What unsettled the townsfolk most was how quickly it seemed the family had vanished. There were no packed bags, no signs of struggle, and no tracks leading away from the house. It was as if the Whitmores had stood up from their chairs and walked into thin air. Their coats still hung by the door, boots lined neatly on the mat. A pot of stew had gone cold on the stove. The only thing missing was the warmth of human presence. Then someone noticed the portrait. It hung above the fireplace, framed in oak and polished glass. The photograph Samuel had taken of Clara. Except those who remembered the original swore it looked different. Her smile seemed wider now, sharper at the corners, her teeth faintly visible where before they had been hidden. The longer people stared, the more convinced they became that the photograph had changed, though none could prove it. Children cried when their parents forced them to look, claiming Clara's eyes followed them around the room. The sheriff ordered the house searched from top to bottom. Cellar to attic, nothing was found. Not a single member of the Whitmore family ever returned, nor was a body ever discovered. But the photograph remained, watching over the abandoned house, its glass surface reflecting more than just the empty room. Those who dared to step inside swore the smile grew wider with each visit, as though Clara herself knew something the rest of the town refused to admit. After the Whitmore house was declared abandoned, most of the family's belongings were auctioned off. Furniture, silverware, and trunks of clothing were scattered across the county. But the portrait of Clara drew unusual attention. Some claimed it should be destroyed, while others insisted it was simply a photograph, nothing more. In the end, a wealthy collector purchased it, intrigued by the town's fearful whispers. He hung it proudly in his study, confident he could prove the villagers wrong. For the first few nights, all was quiet. Then, according to his journals, the house began to change. Doors creaked open on their own, mirrors fogged with condensation, though no fire was lit, and in the dead of night, he claimed to hear a faint, muffled laugh echoing down the hall. Within a year, tragedy struck. The collector's home caught fire under mysterious circumstances. The blaze consumed nearly everything. Yet when neighbors searched the ruins, they found the portrait unharmed, its frame untouched by smoke or flame. The smile on Clara's face seemed broader now, her teeth faintly visible in the reflection. No one could explain how a piece of glass and paper had survived such heat, and no one dared keep it. Yet still, it passed on. Another buyer, curious and skeptical, took the portrait into his possession. The cycle repeated itself again and again. Each new owner began with doubt, dismissing the tales as small-town superstition, but each soon reported strange occurrences. Some swore the photograph shifted positions on its own. Others heard laughter at night, a sound so faint they questioned their sanity. One family in Illinois claimed the words, "Look closer," appeared in the bathroom mirror, fogged in steam, while the portrait hung silently in the hallway behind them. With every transfer, the stories grew darker, until the painting was less a treasure and more a curse. Perhaps the most unsettling account came from a widow in Kentucky who inherited the photograph after her brother's death. She said Clara's eyes changed, that on stormy nights they reflected shapes moving in the background, figures that weren't in the room. Her servants refused to work past sundown, claiming they heard footsteps, pacing in the hall where no one walked. The widow herself admitted to waking in the middle of the night to find the portrait on the floor, face down, though she had locked the room before bed. She swore the smile had lengthened when she returned it to the wall. By the 1920s, the photograph had earned a reputation among collectors as an object of misfortune. Each time it surfaced in an estate sale or private auction, people whispered about the tragedies tied to its owners, sudden deaths, unexplained disappearances, homes reduced to ashes. Yet, despite the warnings, it continued to move from hand to hand, as if the portrait itself refused to be forgotten. And through it all, the one constant remained, that smile, unchanged, and yet somehow always changing, pulling tighter, sharper, as though it was never meant to belong to Clara Whitmore at all. By the early 1960s, the photograph had passed into the hands of a private collector in Chicago, a man known for his obsession with Victorian curiosities. Unlike others before him, he wasn't afraid of the whispers surrounding Clara's portrait. In fact, he welcomed them. He had the tools and the technology of his era: magnifying lenses, electric lamps, and high-resolution enlargements. If there was anything strange about the image, he was determined to uncover it. Late one winter evening, he placed the portrait beneath a bright lamp and leaned close, his eyes narrowing as he traced every line of Clara's face. At first, nothing unusual stood out. The smile was the same unsettling grin, described for decades, the eyes hollow and unblinking. But when the collector adjusted his magnifier and focused on the pupils, a chill ran through him. In the glossy black orbs of Clara's eyes was a reflection, tiny but distinct. He expected to see the faint shape of the photographer, or perhaps the studio lamp. What he found instead was something else entirely. A face, smaller, darker, and impossibly clear. It was grinning even wider than Clara herself. He examined it again and again, convinced his mind was playing tricks. Yet the more he studied the detail, the more undeniable it became. The reflection wasn't Samuel Rourke, nor any object in the room. The features were wrong, sharper and more distorted, like a mask that had been twisted into a smile. It was as though another presence had been captured at the moment the shutter clicked, hiding in plain sight within Clara's eyes. And the more he looked, the more it seemed that the reflection was not looking at Clara, but directly at him. Terrified but fascinated, the collector made enlargements of the portrait, spreading them across his study wall. Each enlargement magnified the reflection further, but instead of becoming blurred or indistinct, the features only sharpened. The grin stretched wider, the teeth more defined. Some who later saw the enlargements swore the reflection appeared to shift from copy to copy, the angles slightly different, as if the face had moved between frames. "It isn't frozen," the collector wrote in his notes. "It's watching, waiting." Those notes were the last record of his study. Within months, the collector was found dead in his home, slumped over his desk. The police report listed it as a natural heart failure. But his colleagues whispered that his expression told another story. His mouth was curled, just faintly, into a smile, and pinned above him on the wall, the portrait of Clara remained, her eyes dark, her grin unchanged, with that second face still gleaming inside her pupils. By the mid-1980s, the portrait had gained such a reputation among collectors that few dared to even touch it. Its history of fire, death, and disappearance had transformed it from a curiosity into an object of dread. Yet, it eventually surfaced at a private auction in New York, where it caught the eye of a reclusive businessman. Unlike those before him, He was not a skeptic, nor a scholar, but a man who believed power could be harnessed from dark objects. He paid a small fortune for the photograph and had it delivered to his penthouse, locked behind heavy oak doors, as though it were a treasure he intended to keep hidden from the world. At first, the businessman claimed nothing unusual happened. He even boasted to associates that the so-called curse was a myth, that all the stories were exaggerated tales passed from one frightened owner to the next. But his staff began whispering within weeks. The portrait, they said, seemed alive in the lamplight, its glass shimmering faintly, as though moisture gathered inside the frame. One maid swore she saw Clara's chest rising, as though she were breathing beneath the paper. Another claimed her lips twitched when no one else was looking. None of them stayed employed for long. The businessman himself was not immune. He confessed in his journals that he avoided the study at night, though he never explained why. In one entry, he described passing the locked cabinet where the portrait was kept and hearing something faint pressing through the wood. It is laughter, but too small, too close, as though it comes from behind the glass. He moved the portrait to another room, yet the sound followed him, always distant, always muffled, as though carried on the surface of the photograph itself. Then came the most disturbing account of all. The businessman claimed that one evening, while drinking alone, he caught sight of movement inside the glass of the frame, not in the photograph itself, but in the reflection. Clara's lips parting ever so slightly, her teeth glimmering in the dim light. He staggered closer, convinced it was a trick of the whiskey, only to see her mouth twitch again, slow and deliberate. The grin widened, not on the paper, but on the pane of glass that covered it, as though something trapped within had finally found its way to the surface. The portrait was never seen publicly again. The businessman withdrew from society, his curtains drawn tight, his name fading from social circles. Whispers claimed he had locked the photograph in a steel vault beneath his building, though others said it had been buried, or worse, destroyed. But no one could confirm the truth. All that remained were his final words, scribbled in a shaky hand on the last page of his journal. If you ever see the image, do not look at the smile. It is not hers, so the portrait of Clara Whitmore has slipped through hands, across decades, leaving behind ash, silence, and unanswered questions. Some believe it's still hidden away, locked in a vault somewhere, waiting for the day it's uncovered again. Others whisper that it was never just a photograph at all, that the smile belonged to something else, something that used Clara as a doorway. And maybe that's the real reason no one dares show the image anymore. Not because it's lost, but because it's still changing, still watching, still smiling. So if one day, scrolling through dusty archives or forgotten forums, you happen to stumble across the photograph of a young woman in 1885 with a grin just a little too wide, look closely, but not for too long, because the smile you see staring back might not be hers.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.